Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Jacob Silverblade. Today I've got a bit of a different video for you. We're going to go through all the factions. What? All the factions? The ones which I want to see change. We're going through everything which I believe I would want to see in the next balance day, to say if I could just create it the way I would like it. And just putting my thoughts out there, what I'd like to see change, what I think is broken, what I think could use some buffs, that sort of thing. And also I'll talk about, with each faction, just long-term sort of vision for the future, eventual goals, which I'd like to see a little bit. So yeah, we're going to cover everything in this video. I'll try to make this as quickly as possible. See you in the next part. So we're on to GSC, and last time this wasn't as quick as I wanted to be, so I'm going to be really quick with this. Basically, there's a combination of this guy and these guys actually being the problem. Point is that you can easily get 5 of these guys in your hand because of this guy, and with 5 of them you can do 10 damage to the board just playing all 5 for 5 energy. You play another troop, you do another 5 damage, so you can easily get 20 damage on the board just by playing all 5 of these, and then 2 other troops for about 10 energy. And result is that that's probably just an instant win scenario for the GSC, and you'll be surprised how, particularly with this guy, you can easily get into that scenario. Now, of course, there's other cards which exist, which I'll show on the screen now, where you got the sabotage card, and there's a couple of others which can generate these cards, of course. However, it's ultimately, I think this is the worst candidates for it, so I would change it honestly to rally, create 2 neophyte initiates in your hand. It's a reliable source of it. It makes it a good, decent combination. However, it's not going to be giga busted and broken, where it's then just say create 5 of these guys if you have 4 troops on the board, for example. Or if you have 2 troops, your warlord, and then they attack, you play this guy generating 2, and then you make them vulnerable, and then guess what? They're able to attack again. Point is just you get 2 of these guys, you generate 1 of them Omegas, you create a whole bunch of these guys, and I believe that to be broken. Yes, you could nerf this, however, I'm not quite sure how I'd nerf this apart from increasing its energy cost to 2, and I don't think that really is. It makes it kind of useless, so I would nerf this just to create a rally. Next up, we're going to talk about sabotages. Sabotages I believe to be fundamentally broken. I believe that so many things put sabotages in the enemy hand, and I quite often find that they cost either the same, or they do this, put a sabotage in your opponent's hand, and then you also bring a threat. For example, the 6 energy does it on strike. So you have the threat of a 5 range attacking unit with 6 life. Yes, it's probably taken some damage, but not probably a lot. And you put a sabotage in your hand, so you have to deal with the sabotage, and you also have to deal with the threat. Otherwise, it's just a 2 energy. For example, you've got the 2 energy 1/3 of 2 life, and that's going to put sabotage in opponent's hand. You play the sabotage, well, guess what? It's already made its cost back, because you've just had to spend 2 energy to deal with your opponent's 2 energy stuff, and they also have a 2 energy unit. I find that to be fundamentally broken. So there's also the other problem, is that they can very easily fill your entire hand with sabotages, making it a late game sort of not possible to play. The end result is that I think there should be a cost reduction of this in some kind of form. The point is that when sabotages build up, particularly in your hand, you're playing late game, and all you got is sabotages in hand, is a scenario I don't think anybody really wants, and should not be actually possible to be achieved. How I'll change it is the good suggestion from Nova, and I think it's Lord Edge inside in-game game, Nova from the Discord, which was decrease the cost of this at the end of your turn. So I'd apply this to the poison one, I'd apply this to the cult propaganda, and I'd apply this to jammed communications. However, with jammed, I think that's the worst out of the 2, so I would put that actually up to 3 energy initially to play for jammed communications, and then that reduce costs over time. Otherwise, I just apply this to all these. The one thing I won't apply it to is the improvised barricade, because the whole point of that is that it's that 3 energy. If that went cost reduced every single turn by 1, I don't think it would actually be playable. So hence it's meant to stay inside your hand. End result is, I think sabotages are actually fundamentally broken, and I think they end result in quite toxic gameplay anyway. So some kind of nerf would be good, so that you're not just getting at a disadvantage or even paying more than the opponent costs to put into your hand, for example with Sabotage Network making them more cost more, I don't think that's exactly good. The final thing I'd say is Magus itself. I think it's not, of course, the stat line, it's of course the hero power. I think the ultimate problem is that you get to choose and it also costs one less. Both at the same time is a broken effect, and I don't think that's good. Either it should not be choose, or it should not be reduced cost by 1. I would remove the reduced cost by 1 part. Choosing is quite interesting, you can tactically play around that. I would keep the choose. The -1 cost, however, results into potential for broken combos, which wouldn't be due before, or literally it's just as simple as you can play on curve earlier to deal with your opponent's stuff earlier. I don't think that's good, and I think Magus is actually definitively one of the more powerful warlords out there, at least, and actually borderline broken, I would say, with that ability of -1 cost. So I don't think it should have 1 cost because of all the potential broken units it has access to. That's GSC. Right, now on to Imperial Guard, and first off we're going to talk about these two cards together, and then we're going to be talking about these two cards and how they lead to broken tank gameplay. It's borderline broken, it's not actually broken. This is the second faction, I believe they're the second most egregious, however I don't think they're on the same level of broken as GSC, by the way. I actually believe the Imperial Guard are just the next one down. I actually think they're pretty alright. But I think they do need that just slight nudge, whereas GSC do need a bit more of a battering to bring them into place, to be honest. So with Imperial Guard, we got Minka-esque, and I believe it's just the ability to make all infantry cost 1 less, particularly with Verban Vanquisher, making that free effectively. I think it's borderline broken. Actually, this is one of the things which I'd change. So I have to say Minka-esque making all infantry cost 1 less. I think it should just be the first infantry each turn. So this would include itself, hopefully, so EG can code it right. So you'll play this, and then the next infantry will cost 1 less, and then that's all you'll get. There will be no more cost reduction. I just think the ability to spam the entire board with so much infantry for way less is a not so great mechanic, and you're still getting quite a bit of value out of that. Every single turn, you're getting that one thing which costs 1 less. I think that's still a pretty good darn play. It's also with the Verban Vanquisher, particularly with that ability to choose a troop, any troop in hand. I don't think it should be any troop. I think decreasing the cost of those big, powerful tanks lead to potentially broken plays, with particularly the next card, which is full throttled, really getting like a Baneblade on turn 5, which, yes, has absolutely happened to me before. I think it's so binary whether you win that or not. Basically, you have to be playing, oh gosh, I gotta hope I have hard removal, otherwise I lose. And I have seen that before, absolutely. So I think Verban Vanquisher should only apply to infantry troops. This is making it more of a aggro sort of style, supports that style, but you're not getting into those big tanks, which I think is a problem with this card. Next up, we got Full Throttle, and it's more Full Throttle when combined into Ursula Creed. It's of course Ursula Creed's ability when it generates a stratagem, which could generate a Full Throttle. It's one of the ones you would pick. It would just cost by 1, so it's actually 0 energy. Your next card costs 2 less. I would change this to ultimately, yes, 0 energy, but your next vehicle this turn costs 1 less. This way it's not actually breaking with Ursula Creed, because you know you don't have -1 cost cards in the end of the day of the game. Thank goodness we don't have that. But I would say that Full Throttle shouldn't be able to, you know, do this. Where you generate them, you have another Full Throttle, generate one with Ursula, and then you have a vehicle which now costs 3 less, so you can play a 8 energy tank on 5 or 10 energy tank on 7. I think that's borderline broken, and you basically saying to the opponent, do you have hard removal? If you do, you should use it now. If you don't, you will lose. And I don't think that's actually fun for the game, personally. I don't think there's much strategy in that. And so hence that's what I would change to make it more in line with other things. Then you got Siege Warfare. Now Siege Warfare is draw 2 vehicles from your deck and deploy them. I quite like this. I think it's really cool. This is more, the last things were more around Ursula's broken ability and fixing that. This is much more around Denkler, because Denkler has the ability to get the Astropath, which I don't think is actually broken, and that's why I'm not including in this list. But he can go along, give the Astropath flank. The Astropath can then use its duty ability to generate draw card, which is this Siege Warfare, as you see right here, and then that card comes out on 8. And I think it's still a really good card just to play on 10 energy. Getting to potential Rogal Dawns, potential Baneblades is really powerful for 10 energy. The fact that you get 2 because the opponent needs 2 hard removals just to be able to deal with it. And you're not like exactly losing much. In fact, the opponent can very easily be ahead and you can just totally come out on top after playing this. That's the whole point. So I think this could use just a slight nerf, it's just in cost increase. I think it's actually fine if it was like 11/12 cost. I would do 11 in cost this balance update and then do 12 next. I think that would be good. And just see how things go. See if it says 11. Is it still breaking it? Then we should do 12. And I think that's perfectly fine because you can still get 12 energy in this game. I think that still works. And deploying 2 tanks for free, well, no, not for free, but for 10 is very, very powerful and could use that slight touch. Then you got Ursula Creed. It's herself. We got talent. It's, you know, we're not really too worried about the duty ability. Yes, it's very good, but it's more the legendary commandment. And I just wanted to talk about it because I don't think, unlike Magus, where this is the difference between Ursula and Magus for me right now. I think this legendary commandment is actually fine, unlike Magus, because Magus' ability has a whole range of different units, which are all very much worth playing. We got multiple different choices, and you also have -1 cost. I think legendary commandment at the moment is a perfectly fine warlord power, because if you look at the stratagems on average for the Imperial Guard, they are typically quite bad. An example is this, and I might show other examples on screen right now to show you what bad stratagems that you could get with the Imperial Guard. This is just one of them we're trying to talk about here. This is just not worthwhile for 2 energy. Getting +2/+2 is nice, but you're not getting 2 life, so it isn't actually worth its cost, and all you're getting instead is concussive. Ultimately, you're behind by playing this and putting it in your deck. This is one of the stratagems that you could get with legendary commandment. In fact, it might be one of the better ones, depending on the scenario. So hence, as a result, the -1 cost part is fine for now. However, I think actually what they should do in the long run, this is in several updates down the line, is that they should buff all the Imperial Guard stratagems so they're not all bad. And then not make this -1 cost. I think the -1 cost part is broken and isn't good. However, when all you have access to is these bad stratagems right here, I don't think it's actually broken. I just makes it playable, and hence as an ability I think it's actually fine. However, the stratagems shouldn't be bad. They should be playable in other decks, and then the end result is that if they should be playable in other decks, they would make Ursula broken. But we don't want to make Ursula broken, so in the long run, eventually I do believe this should get nerfed, and that's Imperial Guard. Right, next up we have the Sisters, and it's obviously just one particular outlier we have right here. It's Junith, and it's particularly Lead the Righteous ability. Lead the Righteous is of course not this ability right here. It has the 5 faith requirement right now, which is deploy a 2nd Battle Sister. Deploying 2 Battle Sisters is ultimately broken for 2 energy and shouldn't be, it should be really difficult in the game to get to this stage. However, right now with 5 faith, it's actually quite easy. All you need is a Relics of St. Catherine and then 1 more faith from somewhere, and now you're doing it. Now you have a broken ability, and it's the whole reason why Sisters are actually a problematic faction. It's not actually they are, it's because just Junith. And hence, as a result, I believe that it should have some sort of kind of change here. Now, I don't think removing the ability altogether is a good idea. If you do that, you have the old result of Junith, and the old result of Junith is that Junith was actually the worst warlord in the game. I don't think she would be anymore if she was reverted back to this. However, I think it would still not be a good warlord. So, what do we need to do? I think we just simply increase the faith requirement from 5 to either 6 or 7. I would go with 7 to be on the safe side. It makes it a good late game wall of power, and she can end up getting to late game, but it means that it's not turned on so easily early on. Maybe 6, maybe that's alright, but I find it getting 1 faith quite easily with relics is actually very doable, and it shouldn't be that easy, I would say, to end up deploying 2 battle sisters. That's the end result of that. I would say also Beacon of Faith, this is the old version. The new version, of course, is it gives +1 life as well for 3 faith. So it's just more powerful when you get to 6 faith, because you get the +1 life and also the 6 faith requirement of +1 melee and +1 range. I ultimately think it shouldn't give the +1 life for 3 faith. I think it should be resorted back to its old self, which is this one. And you might be like, well, people didn't play this in the past, but that's because I don't think Junith, with its deploying 2 battle sisters a turn, ability didn't exist in the past. Now it does. I think Beacon of Faith is actually ultimately fundamentally broken card, particularly with that combo of just deploying 2 battle sisters for 2 energy and then spending another 2 energy to give them all 3 faith and +1 attack. I think that's not good. I think it shouldn't be able to do that, because we now do have that ability to deploy 2 battle sisters. I would change that so that it doesn't just give +3 faith for +3 life for only having 3 faith. So the end result is I would change to 6 faith, deploy 2 battle sisters instead of it being 5, and I would change this so that it no longer gives life. And that's how I nerf sisters, so that Junith is more in line with the other sister warlords. Right, now on to the Swarmlord and the Tyranids. This is more of a talking point, because I recognize some of the other Swarmlord warlords are bad, particularly Neurophrobe being particularly bad and not so great. I just want to acknowledge the fact that it's more of a talking point that Swarmlord is a broken warlord, and right now is obviously competing with the top of the meta, where the other warlords I don't believe are, maybe excepting Turvagon if you play it well, but it's more of a you have to play it well sort of warlord, where Swarmlord is quite easily one of the more broken warlords and could use some kind of nerf in some sort of way. The only problem is I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure how to do that without just making it a 2-2 in stats without it being a 3-1. That would be a solution. Yes, it would make Swarmlord in line with all the other warlords, and yes, it would make it more playable when compared to Terra Vardengast and stuff like that. You could also nerf its hero power, so no longer gives +1 life. Maybe that's the broken part, but personally, I don't think that's actually ultimately broken. I think they've just ultimately overvalued the synapse, particularly low-cost synapse creatures. So, for example, the Neuraloid, its ability just for 0 energy to synapse and give, bonus life to adjacent units, and the Neurogorn, I'd say. This is the old version Neurogorn. It now has 1 melee, tied 2, I believe, but it only costs 1 energy to be able to put the Neurogorn in. So for 3 energy, you could put 3 copies with just a single card because it's got tied 2, and you can give the unit 3 melee attack, and guess what? It has 6 life. That's really good for actually 3 energy. Same with Neuraloid, just able to play this for completely free and then buff adjacent units up. With its Synapse ability, I think it's too strong. That's how I would go about it. I think Synapse on these low cost units is actually too prevalent and too strong, and it just enables too many broken buffing combos with a whole bunch of stealth units to be able to attack with Swarmlord. I don't think it's actually Swarmlord itself, which is the problem. However, that being said, what I will say is I'm not entirely sure how to do that, because I still kind of want to keep the archetype into play and not just completely crush it to the ground, and I do fear it will do that. And I will say also there's other cards like Toxic Miasma and Apex Predator, which are just ultimately bad, and it doesn't lead to good gameplay. Like, these are just bad cards. And so hence I also acknowledge that with Tyranids there are certain cards in its faction, actually quite a few cards, which are just ultimately bad and doesn't get seen played at all. So they could use buff to the bad cards. However, something I do believe does need to happen to Swarmlord. Buffs to the bad cards with Toxic Miasma, I'm not entirely sure, but at least it could blind the entire board for 3 energy. And I think Apex Predator, I would increase its cost, but I'll give them vulnerable until next turn. So I'd make it like a 7 energy card, give vulnerable until your next turn, and probably range attack as well. but it will be 7 energy. So yes, it might be worthwhile to be able to do that, and I think that would give more synergy to actually one of the legendary warlords, which is Winged Hive Tyrant. Being able to play Winged Hive Tyrant with Apex Predator, I think would actually be pretty cool, because then you get that synapse and you're getting 3 different units that are vulnerable until next turn, but it costs you 7 energy, just quite a bit, but then this Winged Hive Tyrant are able to enable that. I think that could be pretty cool play. However, this is all speculative and things for the potential future, which I'd like to see. However, the Swarm is something I do believe needs to happen to Swarmlord. Right, now on to Eldar, and this is another change I'd like to make to Eldar. Simply, I think the entirety of the faction, pretty much, of Eldar units, is actually in a very good place. And I think I like all the different warlords. They have do different things. I actually quite like Janezar with its stun ability. That actually leads into more of a sort of control style where you're able to stun the enemy warlord all the time, prevent damage being taken. I quite like it. However, there's one thing which is a complete outlier, which I think leads to very much problematic gameplay, and that's Reclaim the Stars. And since I wanted to talk about that a little bit, and how it's just drawing 5 cards and reducing cost by 5 is ultimately a bit too broken for the game as it is right now, and so it shouldn't be a thing. Yes, drawing 5 cards for 7 energy is just fundamentally bad. However, drawing 5 cards and reducing the cost by 5 is just a broken ability. That could lead to a potential for a 7 energy to play a 25 energy turn, and that's not a good thing. So, what do I believe needs changing? Well, I think it's ultimately to do with the cost reduction. I would change it actually a little bit and how it works. I would make it so that the stones would be able to draw you more cards, but it always gave the cost reduction. So for example, I'd make it 7 energy, draw a card, and reduce its cost, reduce all cards drawn cost by 5, and then like every single 2 stones there can be draw another card, and I'll make it up to like 6 stones. So you end up drawing 4 cards, all reduced cost by 5, but you have to spend 6 stones on that, and you get a bit of in between, but that's by the by. As it stands right now, if I wanted to keep it as similar as possible, but without just changing fundamentally how it works, I would make it reduce their cost by 4. I think reduce their cost by 5 is far too much. Reduce their cost by 4, I think is a perfectly fine ability with Reclaim the Stars. And so hence, I think that would lead to not broken play, not being able to play 25 energy worth of units in one turn. Either I'll do that, or I'll do reduce their cost by 3 if needed, because drawing 5 cards and reducing the cost by 3 would be playable. I don't think reducing the stone requirement makes it work, because either you increase the stone requirement where even Galen can't possibly use to Reclaim the Stars and only Keltok can, or you do with you increase it so much that not even Keltok could possibly use Reclaim the Stars, and it just becomes not worthwhile. End result is it will just make it unplayable, or just make it for one warlord, which won't be fun in my opinion. The other possibility is to just increase its base cost, for example make it a 10 energy card. Yes, that would make it more playable, but it would be like a bit iffy. It's not really achieving the point which is meant to be doing, in my opinion. So I think the base cost amount of stones is actually probably about right. It's just a cost reduction, and that would lead to more interesting gameplay in my opinion. Right, now on to the Ultramarines and how I would buff the Ultramarines. There is 2 lines of routes I see you could take. There is the Tactical Insight buff, and then there is buffing up the rest of the collection. The Tactical Insight buff, basically right now as it stands, is not actually a 0 energy card. It is a 1 energy card. This makes it a good card, but not actually that particularly game-defining or broken card, I would say, if it at the 0 energy cost. Now, this would fix the Ultramarine faction and would very much make it playable with all the other factions and bring it into line. However, personally, I do not want to see this change. I think it leads to game-breaking things when you have Tactical Insight as 0 energy, and it leads to potential combos which makes it, well, not fun, but also just makes it very binary to see as an Ultramarines player. Because if you play Ultramarines, particularly with Ultramarines Mirror, It comes down to whether I draw Tactical Insight or not, / whether they draw Tactical Insight or not. If they draw a Tactical Insight, they've by default won if I don't. If I draw 2 copies and they don't, I have won. This is very similar, I do feel like, against other opponents being able to be played against them. By default, I am behind as an Ultramarine player. I will be behind until I get a Tactical Insight play. That is when I come ahead. If I get 2 copies early on, though, I will be ahead, particularly if I'm playing Calgar, because then I can have my card draw advantage, and also, so I'm able to keep up with card draw, and also get the broken plays in. They're able to define and control the board. My point is that I believe that with Tactical Insight just isn't a good card just for the rendition of the Ultramarines, because it's totally determined by whether I draw Tactical Insight or not, and I don't like that. So talking about this, there's the other option about buffing up the cards in general. So I'm going to talk about that in general. This isn't per se a requirement to buff up all these cards in this way. This isn't like a definitive, and you can buff up other cards to make the Ultramarines work. However, this is what I would target in my humble opinion. So first off, I would target Uriel Ventress and Vara Tigurius. I think these are the 2 weakest Ultramarine warlords in the game right now, and the stats show, by the way. Maybe I'll show up a stat rating of new stats out there showing that Vara Tigurius, and I think Vara Tigurius and Uriel Ventress are actually the 2 weakest warlords, to my understanding. So I think these 2 could use some kind of buff. I think this guy could start with the extra card again like he did in the past. I don't think it's going to be broken because Tactical Insight isn't a card you're able to use to able to lay out a whole bunch of damage very quickly. I don't think he can do that. So hence, because it's not a thing anymore. So hence starting with an extra card I think will be perfectly fine. It will lead to an interesting, purely aggro archetype. Then we got Vara Tigurius. Now I think Vara Tigurius could use some kind of buff with its hero powers. For example, draw stratagem I think is perfectly fine, but its smite and shield ability, when does anybody actually use those as Vara Tigurius, and when are they actually playable? My argument is they are both terrible and no one should ever use them when playing Vara Tigurius. You should only really ever use draw stratagem, and only the other ones if you're really out of other card options to able to make plays. I don't think you're making a good play though, and I think your deck is going to be bad. I think it's probably bad by default, which can't be helped because of the Ultramarine cards. What do I say? Hey, about Vara Tigurius then and buffing it up, I say you could do 1 or 2 things. One of the things is just buff up Smite and the Shield ability. Shield would also give life to the target as well, and Smite would actually just do additional damage for free energy effectively, not just... So instead of it being 1 to 3 damage, it will do 2 to 3 damage, being far more reliable. The other thing you could do is give it a Codex ability. Yes, I do recognise that with Avenging Zeal could become a little bit on the broken side, particularly with Avenging Zeal when you're starting hand, but that will be the consequence of that. However, it would lead to interesting play because technically this can give life to your warlord. Yes, I do think over a moment should actually give +3 life because Synapse is not a thing for the Ultramarines, but it will be actually an interesting thing if warlord for the Ultramarines actually had a Codex ability. I think that would be interesting, and I think what I would do is make it Codex, deal 1 damage to a random enemy troop. It would be specifically troop, and it would receive specifically 1 damage. I wouldn't buff up the other things then, but these are just some things you could do, and it would lead to interesting plays. Now, what you got is, over a moment, as I talked about, first thing I'll change is Death from Above. Death from Above, I see as a very much a situational card, and I think it's a bad card in, like, the wrong situation. For example, if they're really low on life, Death from Above is a brilliant card. You can use it as a finisher. It's great for that. If Death from Above, though, however, is not, if you're not in that situation, for example, I think it's a bad card because most of the time the opponent will play a 4 energy troop, for example, with 5 life, not with 4 life, so it would live. Death from Above will do 4 damage to that target if you have no other play, and then you'll have to punch it, resulting in you being behind because you just have a Death from Above and you didn't have your own 4 energy troop with 5 life. My point is that Death from Above, I don't think it's that good a card. There's no advantage in that scenario, and it's actually a bad card because it doesn't even deal with the threat. Personally, I think it should have Death from Above, deal 4 damage. If the target dies, draw a card, so that you have just some sort of advantage in keeping up with tempo and being able to not be behind. I think Death from Above would be great for that.
Next up, we've got Gather the Company. Yes, you could be arguing with my Lavarius build being the best Ultramarine build out there right now, being a bit too greedy. But personally, I think my Lavarius build isn't even making VJ's top meta list yet, so it needs some kind of minor buff anyway, and this is how I'd buff it with Gather the Company. I would actually just buff it as this wording right here, but for 5 energy. It's just the ability to play some stronger, more vehicle-based troops would be more interesting and would lead to potential other plays. You could have the Impulsor instead of the Aggressor Sergeant, for example. You could have the Scout Bikes could be played. You could have the Outriders. Right now, as it stands, you can't actually do that with that kind of build because it doesn't refill the 1 energy. So I would recommend Gather the Company, just refill with that 1 energy with vehicle troops as well, and that'll make things more playable and it'll lead to a more interesting deck building archetype. Next up, we got Angels of Death. My point with this is that it's just not worthwhile getting a lot of these guys out for 6 energy. Because if you get 3 of them out, guess what? They're going to do 6 damage to target, they're all going to die. You're gonna get another 6 energy troop. That troop having 6 life and bound to be having at least 3 damage in one stat or the other. And what I mean is actually in both stats. I don't know of a 6 energy troop really which has like 2 life. And I think that's the Necron one is the only one which comes as example, and I think that's more for its rally ability. So it has that as advantage above this. This doesn't have something like that. So you have to use Intercessors. They go along, they attack, and they're most likely going to die. So how I'd change it is the actual change in the Intercessor, because it's actually just generically a bad card. I've never seen anyone put this into their deck. So I would either change it so they have just 3 range attack innately, and I think that would be fine with Impulsor, or they have 4 life. So they have more of a chance of actually surviving against certain targets, slash if they do 3 range attack, well, you're actually able to deal with a threat with only 2 of them, not 3. That's my point, to make it more playable. And you've got Lieutenant Calcius. I think there's just a lot of troops out there for 6 energy right now as it stands, with a high range attack and able to take Lieutenant Calcius out far too easily without suffering that much of a punishment back. I think Lieutenant Calcius could go back up to 4 range attack, so that when they try and attack it and they take damage, they actually take a lot of damage back and not just a small amount. I think it's just fallen behind too much to be not playable, and I think it needs that range attack increase. Now we've got Predator Annihilator. I just want to see this do something interesting, something which the helicopter, the Storm Talon gunship, doesn't do. So I want this. This is meant to be the Predator Annihilator. It's got las cannons. They're meant to be good at blowing up tanks. I want this to be a tank destroyer. I want to see it blow up tanks. I want it. If you didn't realize, a whole bunch of things at the bottom have these keywords. For example, vehicle, or this guy has actually infantry. There's some things which synergize it, but I want to see it as doing Codex, deal 5 damage to an enemy vehicle / monster. And yes, I would include battle suit with that as well, if you're for those tile players out there, counting battle suits as vehicles, but I wouldn't count drones as. I would keep that separate. So hence I would say Predator Annihilator could deal 5 damage to a random enemy with a vehicle or monster, and actually seen as a anti-tank sort of destroyer, which it's meant to be, the Predator Annihilator. The other option is to make it just straight up destroy the target. However, I'd give a lot of clauses to that to make that possible. For example, I'd make it random enemy, damaged enemy vehicle or monster. So it would have to be damaged, you have to get the codex off, and it's going to be random so you can't determine it. But that would be a very powerful ability just to be able to play this guy and go, boom, your Baneblade, which is taking 1 point of damage from a scout, is now destroyed. I will admit that is a potential very strong play. However, it would certainly leave it to be a lot more interesting, much more of a control archetype, and with the big tanks and vehicles out there right now, I'd like to see this more into play, more playable into that sort of meta build where you got the Imperial Guard of its big tanks and the Predator Annihilator, actually something they have to be scary and think about. Either that 5 damage or destroying a random damaged enemy vehicle. I think that would be quite interesting. Then we finally got Avenging Zeal. Yes, if they decrease the cost of Tactical Insight, or maybe give Varo Tigurius a Codex ability, Avenging Zeal costing 10 energy would be perfectly fine. However, without that, I would say Avenging Zeal does need to go back down to its 8 energy. I don't think this is a playable card as it stands at 10 energy. I really don't. It just leads to too much in late game. The only time I've ever been able to play this as a card at 10 energy with the Tactical Insights being not 0 energy, to cause multiple Shrodex triggers. The only time I've ever been able to play this is when I've had it in my starting hand and I've built my entire deck to triggering Codex. Otherwise, I don't think this is a playable card at 10 energy. At 8 energy, I think it's far more interesting, because then you're getting this down to from 6 energy to actually 4 energy, and that becomes far more of a playable card with some flank troops being able to deal with some threats, but then you get that permanent buff on your Warlord to actually be a 4 damage unit, and it can actually do some threat. So that's how I change Avenging Steel, and that's how I change the Ultramarines. Thank you for sitting through this video. I hope you enjoyed the video and you agreed with my hot takes. If you do disagree, leave it down in the comments below, and I hope to see you next time.